Any kind of small, yeah. Mhm. Is it, how do you transition from home to institution? Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot I could add there. I would say, if I can summarize it, our goal in true education is to teach a child not so much the information, but teach them how to learn. And if they know how to learn and how to problem solve, there's no transition needed. They'll go straight into any educational setting and adapt very well. And I've seen that in many, many places. And so that's one of the reasons we're looking at true education. Notice we didn't call this conference a homeschooling conference, because true education can happen in many different settings. But we run the risk, even though I think there's a lot here from home educating, we run the risk of taking conventional education and just taking locations, right? And just putting it at home. That's not going to do it either. What we need is true education, which is a total change of education. That can be done in the school. It's not the ideal, right? The ideal is in the home, but that certainly can be done in the school. But families also need to keep that in mind. But if we're following through education, come the time that they need to move into a different educational setting, another school, university, whatever it is, they will fit right in, because they know how to work. Good question. All right, we go to live here. Excellent. Let that word of prayer get started. Father in heaven, thank you for all the many wonderful things we've been able to learn today. Father, as we get into this last session, we pray for the Holy Spirit to guide our minds, help us to receive what you want to teach us, to understand, give us clarity of thought, help us to focus. Pray this to you. I ask in Jesus. All right, this topic this afternoon is one is a real challenge to do in an hour presentation, but we'll take a shot at it. It is, I would say, probably one of the most overlooked and yet most important aspects of true education. And that has to do with the schedule of brain development and what to teach when. There's an interesting statement in Christian education, one that is kind of brushed aside and said, well, no, that's kind of old-fashioned advice, when in reality it is absolutely in line with the modern science today. Parents should be the only if they're children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parents should open before them God's great book of nature, interesting, describing an early childhood education program up until what age? 8 or 10, okay, and who should the teachers be? Parents, it says, and what should the textbook be? Nature, it says. All right, interesting. Continuing, the only school route for children until 8 or 10 years of age should be the open air, amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery, and also the textbook, the treasures of nature. All right, interesting early childhood curriculum. Parents, the teachers, nature, the textbook, and the classroom, the open air. Does that sound like standard kindergarten today? Hardly. Exactly, completely opposite. Now it's interesting, we don't have to look into all the statistics, but if we just look around the world at the trends in early childhood education, we find exactly what James said. It is headed the opposite direction. They did a study, they asked kindergarten teachers, is reading fluently too much to expect? And just to clarify, because kindergarten means different things in different places, where this study was conducted, we're talking kindergarten around 5 years of age. So is reading fluently too much to expect at 5 years of age? Well, around half of kindergarten teachers, a little less than half, said, yeah, that would be too much to expect. They asked the same question to kindergarten teachers 12 years later in 2010, now only 10% felt expect. You see what's happening in our expectations for early childhood. We're seeing a shift, more and more academic. They asked the question, should children learn to read in kindergarten? Around 30% said yes. Well, 12 years later, they asked the same question, and now it was up to nearly 80% said, yeah, this is the right age to teach reading. 1998, around 50% in full-day kindergarten programs. 12 years later, and it's gone up to 80%. Time for art and music has dwindled, with around 80% of kindergartners being taught to read, 97% composing and writing complete sentences, and 99% learning capitalization. Major, I say this is happening everywhere. There are kindergartens who are not having this high pressure in academics, but we're just looking at a trend around the world. A much more intense focus on the academic learning. School districts today report a more structured kindergarten program that's centered on specific academic objectives and emulates what was once a grade 1 focus. So you notice what they're doing. We're taking what used to be learned in grade 1, and now we're moving it earlier. Kindergarten, let's move here. These are some of the stuff in the US. Here we go. An increase in society focus on academic readiness. Interesting, we've heard that term a lot, right? Academic readiness. It has led to a focus on structured activities that are designed to promote academic results as early as grade school, with a corresponding decrease in playful learning. Again, still a big shift changes in our expectations. A study found 30% of US kindergarten children no longer have recess. That is bad, exactly. I mean, we're not talking university, we're talking kindergarten, 5 to 6-year-olds. They need to play. They don't have the time. 5 to 6-year-olds are being asked to doing math, reading, writing for hours at a time, sometimes with no recess or a very short one. Some teachers have dispensed with snacks during half-day kindergarten because there just isn't any time. Many kindergartners take home homework every day. This is the context. Kindergarten used to be a hands-on, play-based learning environment, even just a generation ago. Now it is sitting there indefinitely. We've got to give them this academic readiness. What the science is showing is this schedule. It is not what they need for proper development. Teacher-led instruction in kindergarten will entirely replace the active, play-based experiential learning that we know children need from decades of research in cognitive and developmental psychology and neuroscience. So let's look at some of the science. You know, a lot of people are like, well, hey, earlier is better. We hear this a lot, you know, prepare them, get them ready. Earlier is better. The research shows that is absolutely false. There is no research evidence for claims that earlier is better. By contrast, a considerable body of evidence indicates the critical importance of play. That's useful work too, useful, you know, everyday stuff like that. In young children's development, the value of an extended period of playful learning before the start of homeschooling and the damaging consequences of starting formal learning and literacy needs to be done. Notice what's saying here. We're missing out on play. They need the play and the work, the useful things of everyday life. They need this before they start the formal schooling. It lays an important foundation. We talked this morning. Physical lays the foundation for mental and spiritual. And notice damaging consequences. Damaging consequences. What the research shows is that a start at early formal schooling before the age of around 8 or 10, interestingly, is actually damaging to the developing mind. Let's look at some of the research. Brain development. You know what this is? And it's what your brain is made out of, it's what it uses for all of its processes. And neurons go through the brain goes through various processes in development. One of the key elements of development is something known as myelination. Now, myelination is an electrically insulating compound that coats the axon of the neuron, and it speeds the information transfer, like insulation on an electrical wire. But the unique thing about myelin is it speeds the information transfer by 100 times. It is the basis of brain development. When we say a child, you know, they're learning to talk, they're learning to walk, they're learning to move in certain ways, they're developing fine motor skills, they're all things that is, along with some other processes, that is myelination occurring. It is essential for development. And what happens is if we try to push information transfer over unmyelinated neurons, it's a futile effort. The brain is going to try to compensate by using myelinated areas of the brain. Myelination of appropriate brain regions coincides with the development of specific cognitive functions such as reading, development of vocabulary, executive decision, making. So when you see a child developing this reading vocabulary, decision making, things like that, that's violation occurring. Now, this process occurs in stages and on a pretty set schedule. If we start at birth, all the most essential bodily functions are unmyelinated. Notice a little a cow, when it's born, how long does it take before it's up and walking around? Just minutes, right? A baby, we're talking a year or more, right? So human infants are far more dependent than the majority of others in the animal kingdom. God created it that way. It's a wonderful opportunity for parents to demonstrate the character of God to their children, and many, many other things. But so what I'm trying to say here is most myelination is happening after birth in humans. Now to look at a brief schedule, this is definitely a generalization, but just to put it as simply as we can, from conception to 15 months, we have very basic brain development going on, basic brain myelination. From 15 months into around 5 years, the limbic system and the relationship areas of the brain are having a major period of development. I want to mention this is actually why it's so important that little toddlers are with their parents, with their mom, especially as much as possible in the early years. That limbic system is vital for emotional development and emotional security later in life, as is their understanding of relationships. So the more that mom is holding the child, being with the child, is helping those areas of the brain develop. Now, around 4.5 to about 7 years in girls, we have the Gestalt area. Dr. Hannaford is using the word elaboration, speaking of myelination and synaptic growth and connectivity and all that sort of things, but specifically myelination in this context. And that is, again, in the Gestalt, or we often say the right hemisphere. It's not purely the right hemisphere, but the Gestalt area of the brain. 4.5 to 7 years in girls. Now, boys have a slower growth period during these stages. It's important to mention. Remember in the statement that we read earlier, it said until the age of 8 or 10. And that's actually a gender difference. It's about 8 for girls and about 10 for boys. I did not say boys were slow, but they develop differently. God designed it this way. In fact, boys take a little longer to develop areas of the brain that are important for spiritual strength. Does God design it, boys? Does God design boys to grow up to be spiritual leaders? Yeah, fascinating. Then at around 6 years in girls, at about 9 years in boys, we see a start in the logic areas of brain development. And then around 8 years, frontal lobe. Now the logic areas continue for many years. It's not saying 7 to 9 years. It's saying starting at around 9 in girls and boys, respectively, and then continues for many years. The frontal lobe continues into the 30s in myelination. So this is something that continues for quite a period of time. Now I'm going to stop there and focus on those 3 areas: the Gestalt area, logic area, and frontal lobe. Now, we have major processing centers in the brain. Differences between the sides of the brain. It is meant that you read the right brain and the left brain. Okay, you do use your whole brain, but we do have major processing centers that are important for certain functions. Now, the left hemisphere deals with things like detail, parts and processes of language, linear patterns, logic, critical thinking, numbers, and reasoning skills. Whereas the right hemisphere tends to deal with things more like images, rhythm, emotion, intuition, imagination, creativity, feeling, faith, belief, and large motor control. For academic learning in the classroom, sitting there with a textbook, which hemisphere would you really need? Definitely the left, right? I'm not saying you're not going to use the right, but you're really going to need the left. The logic, the numbers, the linear patterns, critical thinking, all very primary motor cortex connected with fine motor development, inner speech, very important for reading skills, and fine motor eye teaming and foveal focus, very important for academic learning. Let's go back to our schedule. We saw right hemisphere, major development from around 4.5 years into around 7 years for girls, 9 years in boys. That starting around 7, we see the lung area And again, 7 girls, 9 boys. Lots of areas beginning and moving. Well, we already saw this area is critical for academic learning. What's a typical school starting age? 5, 3, exactly. It depends. It depends on the area, but I can assure you it's in the majority of cases not 7. And definitely not 9. Except in the Scandinavian countries a few years back, it was really they right top of the world. Started here, everybody else. But so what happens? Now, I do just want to clarify something because I get a lot of questions on this. It's really not entirely correct to say the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. We sort of generalize, but really we're talking not about something purely anatomical, but more functional in the brain. So what is really correct is actually to say the gestalt areas and the logic areas. So just if there's any neuroscientists here wanting to pick that apart. And what would be absolutely correct to say the areas of the brain responsible for many academic types of learning are not developed until around 8 years of age and even 10 voice. School starting before kids are ready. So what happens? Is it possible to accelerate learning? Can we speed this process up? Well, unfortunately not. It is a myth that we can accelerate a child's developmental milestones. I love it. Here's a scientist saying, well, children are kind of pre-programmed to reach those ones. Who pre-programmed them? Didn't God just design them that way, right? And your science is going, for some reason, children seem to be pre-programmed to reach certain points of development. Yeah, they would be. God designed them that way, right? It's pretty exciting. Now, to understand what happens, let's talk about plasticity. This is a new area of neuroscience, absolutely fascinating how the brain can adapt. It's very plastic. But it is especially plastic early in childhood. And what it allows the brain to do is to compensate for either damage or pressure in the wrong direction. But it creates some problems. Let's imagine a little child in math class or whatever, reading whatever we're asking them to do at an early age. It's 5 years old. We're asking the brain to do something that it is not ready for. He doesn't have the correct areas myelinated. Because of the brain area to ability to compensate, what the brain is going to do is say, okay, I don't have the correct region ready for this. I need a higher thinking center to learn this type of academic learning, but I don't have it ready yet. So what we're going to do? Let's route the thinking through a different area that has myelinated. What has myelinated at this early age? Basic thinking centers, okay? So you're trying to route what should be higher level learning through a basic thinking center, and the brain starts forming habits. Later on, after the child has matured, you can call tutoring and special education that you want, but they form incorrect habits of learning. Okay? And this is the major connection that we see with learning disabilities today. If a task is asked of the brain for which the corresponding region is not matured, it will form neural routes through lower, more developed sections, resulting in almost permanent utilization. Right? Force a child to learn a concept which they're not ready to act to be on the brain. Now, this is my explanation based on facts that you just heard. Let's hear a quote from some other scientists, Dr. Jim Healy, Nature Minds. Before brain regions are myelinated, they do not operate efficiently. For this reason, trying to make or force them to master academic skills for which they do not have the requisite maturation may result in mixed up patterns of learning. If the right brain system, if the correct brain system isn't yet available for working smoothly, forcing a creative functional organization leads to adaptive lower to the sun, everything is brain time. Trying to drill higher level learning in the brain, they force perform with lower level system and not compare the core question. They have to do the exercise. They have to put stuff down on paper, and we're making them do it, but they're doing it with lower levels, and it's learning. And we run into partners. Right? They get a few years into their schooling, and we're like, what happens? They loved it before. Now we can see better option is wait until they're ready, and it will very quickly. I'll talk obviously examples of that in a moment. But what we can actually create is something called learned helplessness. They're not, but they have that they are helpless at learning. They believe that they are incapable of this. How many have ever heard like a child's like, well, I'm just bad at math. I'm just bad at reading. Yeah, we have friends with reading. But really, you don't need to be just bad at something. You can improve. But they believe that they're incapable of it. A child who is required to learn things before he is ready may be tired of them, or he may become so anxiety and frustrated and will not try at all. I often wonder how many children decide they are dumb. Very interesting wording. Decide they are dumb. What they decided is about certain subjects, when the truth is some simply lack learning to do in a form other than the one they needed to receive at the time. Many children acquire learned helplessness at school when they are confronted with learning tasks that are too difficult for their level of ability. Any learning that has to be put hard and good. Plunge daily is required at appropriate expectation. Children's early promise shrivels and long learning becomes a habit. They may be labeled, treated, exhorted, and fed to tutor, but the basic issue remains unchanged. The school and the child learning. What's important to realize about this, though, is that many children seem like they're doing just fine. Because we reach the point in history now that school is pretty catered to this level of learning. And it's often very exercise based, wrote, and give them exercise paper, and they can do it. And they might even get even great. But very often, it's really. Let's use math. A lot of children, you can give them the formula, a math problem, on paper, and they can solve it. But if you give them a word problem, you know what I mean by word problem? Describe a real life situation that would use the same problem. They can't figure out how to do it. So you're not right. Well, a lot of children, they hate word problems, right? And the reality is they don't know how because it's been really rather the wrong area. They don't understand conceptually, and they can do exercise all day long. For the school that I'm working with after, one of the teachers asked one of the students, well, how big is that? Is it closer to 1 centimeter or 1 meter? He said, I think 1 centimeter. Didn't get it, right? But he's been doing math problems with centimeters and meters long. So what we really need here is to make this practical, we need patience. Okay, being patient and just not getting in this hurry. And as a friend here, the teacher was explaining to me earlier, you know what? From here's the parent. They're demanding, they want this academic readiness, so to speak, and want to produce these results. It's misunderstanding. Okay, we'll get to that, and that's why we're having a class like this. Like understand, can help others understand. Hey, just be patient. And what the research shows very clearly, get into this moment, but those children who wait, who we give them some extra time, they will do better than if you start early. And it's just important to understand what patient and not those societal pressures. Learning in practical hands-on ways rather than books. Now, this is important because some have taken this idea a little bit too far, and they lock up all the books and they don't teach their children anything academic until 8 or 10. No, we're talking about that. We're talking about the traditional learning environment with the textbook, and we're talking about focusing on character in the early years of life. That's not the thing when they have a question, Mom, how do I write my name? Teach them, okay? Teach every day when we're in the garden, hands-on practical learning is great. In fact, it's a great way. If you live in an area homeschooling laws are very restrictive, or wanting to delay the entrance to school, and you need to supply the government requirements, do what's called creative documentation. You're learning through everyday life, fulfill the requirements of government in that way. But again, that's not your focus, but I'm just adding this point because yeah, there's a lot to learn. Not your ultimate goal.
well, character. But you learn a lot through everything. Yes, focus on character. Now, the brain is not the only area that gets damaged. Let's talk about the development of the eyes. Eye teaming, which is the ability to use both eyes to focus on a subject, is essential for reading, as is foveal focus, which is two-dimensional focus. Both of them essential for good reading. Now, these functions don't fully develop until around age 7 to 9. Interestingly, it perfectly aligns with brain development. Now, there's various reasons for this. Less than 5% of vision actually proven dry. Your eyebrow lens for your brain. So you do most of the seeing and the understanding of what you're seeing with your brain. For full vision to occur, information from all cerebral lobes must be accessed. What's going to happen if all cerebral lobes are not developed? Yeah, we're not having vision. Even though a single clear visual image may be received by the eye, a child may be able to decode material because of organization and interpretation of the central nervous system due to lack of maturation. So it's just that children aren't blind, fairly, but they, even though they can see what they're looking at, they're not understanding fully because the brain has developed to correspond with that. But let's talk about the physical development of the eyeball itself. The eyeball is now completely shaped with collagen fibers until approximately age 9. Long periods of reading, now when it's long periods, it's anything more than about 20 minutes. Without relaxing into the distance, could possibly, probably Hannaford's writing this a few years ago, it's not a matter of possibility now. We know clearly from science, it does cause inflammation and the elongation of the eyeball, leading to myopia. Now, do we use this here at myopia? Do you call it nearsighted? Same, okay, either one, yeah. If I say myopia in the United States, I'm like, oh, because it's not a term. But nearsighted myopia, it is the most common eye problem in the world today. Rates of myopia, difficulty seeing distant objects, are soaring. The trend is matched in many other countries, causing eye doctors to wonder what could be causing the decline in vision. Now, if you go to your eye doctor and say, hey doc, why do I have myopia? Very likely it's genetic. Do your parents have myopia? Does it run in the family? It's believed to be a genetic factor, but research has shown that to be not true. It's very connected to environment. So myopia. The normal eye is round in shape with a focal point right at the back of the eyeball. The myopic eye becomes elongated and focal point to farther up the eyeball, and this causes the vision to be blurry. So remember that the myopic eye is elongated. Now, when we look into the distance, especially if we're outside, the eyes are at rest. But when we bring the vision up close, say reading a book or looking at the smartphone, that's a big one. It causes the muscles that are around the lens to contract to bring the vision up close. And that causes the eyeball to get stressed. Now, if that happens for a few minutes, no problem. Call it acute spasm. They relax and you look again at the distance. But if you're focused for long periods of time, if you're reading for long periods of time, looking at a screen for long periods of time, spending a lot of time in the classroom, a lot of distance vision going on, what's happening? The ciliary bodies reach a point of chronic spasm. And they start pulling on their attachment points on the outer layers of the eyeball. Now remember, the outer layers of the eyeball are not firmed up with collagen until around age 9. What happens now? Starts stretching the eyeball. We literally cause myopia by having children read at an early age. And I want to add here, it's not just reading. We have a tendency to give them a lot of craft, little things to cut out, the color and all this stuff. It's not, I'm not saying it's all bad, but we need to be really careful about how much close-up children do. They need the time outside. They need the time with the three-dimensional distance vision. Now, it's interesting to compare the rates of myopia around the world. We used to be areas, for example, the US, around 50% myopic. Now that's pretty bad, but East Asia, 90% myopic. Seoul, Korea being 96% myopic. And as I mentioned, scientists have always said, well, this is just a genetic factor. Let's say genes don't play a role, but the fact of the matter is they're only a very small factor They did a study in Alaska. Alaska was added to the United States, like 59, I think it was, fairly late. And there were large populations of the Inuit, the Eskimos, there in Alaska, who did not go to school at an early age, at all sometimes. And so when Alaska became a state, all of a sudden it required everybody to go to school at age 6 or somewhere around there at an early age. And so they did a study and they looked at rates of myopia in Inuit after a few years. They found the parents the children were 50% myopic. So if the children and young people are 60% myopic and myopia is genetic, what percentage would you expect to find in the parents and grandparents? At least 60, right? That's an age. Here's what they found. Can you see it? Less than 1%. And they said, well, there's the theory of genetics following this one. There's got to be something environmental. They start looking around the world. Again, US, 50%, East Asia, 90%. Any difference in environment, in lifestyle, these two cultures? Huge difference. Way more time in school, way more academic pressure at an early age, twice the amount of time spent in homework for the average East Asian child to the average US child, and far more time spent indoors. Compare that to Africa, continents that are predominantly indigenous, and even children who are going to school often are walking long distances outside. 10 to 20% myopic.
Yeah.
And they even did studies in the British areas in Africa, the British colonized. British, I know, start school very early. And they found in cultures that had 0 myopia, within a few years, all of a sudden there's a problem with myopia, just because the children were going to age 5. They looked in Brazil, Brazil, 13.3% myopic within the city. Indigenous Northwestern Brazil, outside the city, 2.7%. Very connected to lifestyle. Everything to do with that. Indigenous people of the Upper Rio Negro region of the Amazon rainforest in northwestern Brazil, myopia was rare among the indigenous population. Age was not associated with refractive errors of indigenous people. That is interesting because we always think that it's related to age. Age is not associated. Brazilians in the small city which the study was performed had higher rates of myopia. Older pre-education adults had a very low prevalence of myopia, whereas the younger, slightly educated had a higher prevalence of myopia. Interesting. Country living, very connected here. Brazilians city had higher rates of myopia. And they concluded the study saying the low prevalence of myopia in the illiterate indigenous people is consistent with other studies that suggest myopia is related to literacy. Now, I'm not suggesting we also be illiterate. There is another option, and that's called teaching reading a little bit later. Once the eye has developed a little bit, they can learn reading very well and run the risk of myopia, at least not as much. So lifestyle factors involved here are close-up work and also a lack of time outdoors. Now, this is fascinating. They did a study that found that children who spend less time outside were at a greater risk of developing myopia. Less time outside, higher myopia. Now remember, a myopic eye is elongated, right? Now, listen to this. Light stimulates the release of dopamine in the retina. And this neurotransmitter, in turn, blocks the elongation of the eye to develop. Wait a minute. Light causing the release of a neurotransmitter in the retina, which did what? Blocked the elongation of the eye. Light blocking myopia. So where do we get light? Children are supposed to stare at a flashlight? No. Go outside. Children need to spend around 3 hours per day under light levels of at least 10,000 lux to be protected against myopia. How much is 10,000 lux? Lux is measurement of the volume of light, total volume of light. So if you go outside on a sunny day, it's in shade, being about 10,000 lux. So full sun is more than 10,000. Heavy cloud cover bring below 10,000. But it's full daylight, right? Now, lux being a measurement of volume of light. Come into this room and the light that's coming through that window is dissipated to the volume of this room, and the lux measure begins to drop. So we find about 10,000 lux outdoors. Now, anyone want to hazard a guess what the average lux measurement of a well-lit classroom or office? 500. Have you listened to this before? It is 500 lux. Far below what is necessary for proper development. I'm
think I
doing
have
seminar in
Mario,
New Zealand, and I shared this material, but he said, well, actually, here in New Zealand, require at least 7 lux. I see. Okay, that's great, but it's not 10,000. Oh,
Make it sound like it's good.
I ran to really severe myopia as a child, first, and I think 12, went to the eye doctor, the yearly checkup. Doctor said, you know, you're about to go into puberty, and at the rate your myopia is progressing, you're going to probably be blind within 1 year. I didn't hear again, 12-year-old. So the mom asked the eye doctor. We did what the doctor said. Genetic, right? Can't do anything about it. Well, you have bad eyes, mom, so your daughter's going to closets. Mom's driving home, like, hang on, that doesn't make any sense. My son has near perfect vision. Why does my son have perfect vision? My daughter doesn't. Is it environmental factor here? The Bible says the curse causeless shall not come to everything, right? There's cause to effect reasoning. Look up. So she did some research. She found this study. Behind doors. She goes, oh, that's interesting. Because my son, who has perfect vision, basically lives outside, can't get indoors. Whereas my daughter hates going outside, does everything indoors. I wondered if there's a connection. She talked to her doctor and she said, hey, it's an experiment. 2 hours a day, you're at least, you need to spend time outside. Oh, mom, I don't like going outside. Well, that wasn't one of the options. You are going outside for 2 hours a day. So 6 months passed. She's spending 2 hours a day outside. She would practice her violin outside, her homework outside. Like she didn't get the whole idea of activity and that kind of thing. But hey, she was outside. She was getting the light that took the eye. And 6 months later, back to the eye doctor. Examined her eyes and said, I don't understand. Her eyes are the same as they were 6 months ago. They said, thank you very much. They went home. The doctor was corrected. A year passed. She should be almost legally blind right now. Back to the eye doctor. He checks her eyes out. Goes, I really don't understand this, actually. Your myopia has not progressed here. So here's doing your research. Do you think it has any connection? He said, no, I think it's just. Well, methods work great. That's going to the outside. We should be having this close-up work. By 2050, half the world will be myopic and 1 billion people at significant risk of blindness. This is a serious issue we're dealing with. We're going to put tomorrow the media plays this huge role. But as we've already seen, the environmental factor of really doing close-up work with grandchild is one of the major factors in the development of myopia. The eye need to actively experience the world as a whole for vision development. So again, spending several hours outside every day, limit the close-up work reading, limit any screen time. Let's talk about some other factors here. Physical development. What are the 2 #1 commands given to children in the classroom?
Be quiet.
Sit still and be quiet, right? Any problems with that? Yes, actually, children need the activity. We've already talked about this. There are huge benefits. Cerebellum, it has been found to enhance the growth, greater connections between the neurons. Interesting. Susan John, in order for a child to be able to sit still, pay attention, and visually remember the shapes of letters, school, in other words. In order for that to happen, the child first needs to have developed his or her proprioceptive system, which is a sense of the body and face. Now that's a complicated bit of word there, but how do they develop a proprioceptive system? Very simple, whole body activity. Jumping, running, climbing, tumbling, somersaulting, climbing, that kind of thing. It develops a proprioceptive system, which then in turn helps them sit still, pay attention. What we're actually finding from research The more we try to make a child sit still during childhood, causing attention problems later on. They need the activity to develop a good foundation for later learning. Can they learn to sit still? Absolutely. Should they learn to sit still? Absolutely. But we don't want to do it for such long periods of time when they're young. They will be able to focus better if they get the activity early on. Interesting brain-derived neurotrophic factor, fascinating chemical that's released in the brain, very important for protecting neurons, for helping learning in many different aspects. This BDNF is released into the brain when we move. Released through chemical reactions. Proteins when we move our muscles. Now, real. It is required for myelination to proceed, and elevated levels of BDNF for the stage of myelination increase the speed and extent of the final process. Are we catching? Movement literally is essential for the brain development. It will also speed up development. So we're trying to have accelerated learning. We're trying to have academic readiness. Back to Catherine Davis, Professor of Pediatrics, Northern Regents University. I think that parents need to go to educators and say, why is the child sitting down for 6 hours a day with you, 7-year-old boy, needs to move? The fact of the matter is, though, most teachers recognize they kind of wish that. Of course, we're dealing with a system that makes it difficult. I fully recognize kind of bucking against a major systemic flaw here. Now, it's interesting. Christian education, small children should be left as free as lambs to run out of doors, free and happy, should be allowed the most favorable foundation for self-confidence. Free as lambs, free and happy. Now, some people have read this and misapplied it. They think it means that in the morning you feed your children, you open or move them out and say, come back for supper time. I'll move the dog. Nearby. Mom, right? But we're not talking about the absence of the parent. We're talking about the activity involved in, which means very fair. So outside, sometimes after so okay. Much today is possible. Active, play together. I found a study. I put it here just to laugh. Children should learn to play until the age of 8. Says Lego. Oh yeah, they would say that, wouldn't they? As you read through the research, there is very sound. Their children play. Give some of the leisure hours to your children. And in their sport, others using the old English word, playing together. Just not talking about sports in our context today. And when they're confident, cultivate their friendship. And of course, work together. Work is very important development, but notice together, parents with their children is absolutely key. All right, we thought sit still, but what about be quiet? Have you ever seen a group of children playing by themselves? Are they perfectly quiet? Hardly. What about a little child by himself playing? Be quiet? If he's quiet, you start worrying, right? Why? Children don't have something known as inner speech. Up around the age of 8. Children literally think out loud. We adults develop the ability, most of us anyway, to think without talking out loud. Get ourselves talking to ourselves, right? But that's okay. We have the ability. We can think without saying stuff. We have that. Often true. And so we make them be quiet all day long and listen and talk to them rather than interactive engagement. We are literally preventing skills from developing. Good language, like now as possible, is gained only from interactive engagement. Children need to talk as well as to hear. We now know from research this is essential for development. Now, consistent is the need for outer speech. To hear one's own voice and thought, that silent reading is ineffective before the age of 7. Now, this is bad. We have our children don't sit down and read. It's not doing them much good. unless they hear it. And of course, the best is to hear it from mom or dad. So a quiet, simple lifestyle is very important for adult language skill, individual time with adults. They need to be allowed to talk to themselves, and they need to talk together with their parents. This is one of the best things for your children. Wish we could cover all of this, but time is fast. We move right along here. Emotional development. This is a vital aspect of development, and what the research is actually showing us. We used to think emotion and cognition by two separate areas, but we now realize they are absolutely intertwined. Furthermore, emotion is the foundation for cognitive development. Let me say that again. Emotions are the foundation for cognitive development. So, any researcher deals with a child with a learning disability will go and look at the and often enough, they will find an issue with neglect or abuse or divorce or something that is disturbing the child emotionally that's affecting their learning abilities. If we want a child to do well academically, we need to really focus. And of course, that's a major problem when we send them off to school at 4 and 5 years of age, separated from mom and dad. Most of them cry, right?
Yes.
God made them to be with their parents. Quality relationship builds emotional security. Children need this. Emotional well-being and social confidence provide a strong foundation for their cognitive ability. Bricks and mortar that comprise the foundation. Emotional, physical health, social skills, and early years are all important treatments that in school and later in the workplace and community. And the thing is, we can also experience this in the home. I want to apply this to those who are educating. You need to be careful not to try to teach early, not wait for brain development and eye development, physical development, all these sort of things. But we need to be careful about not asking them to do something they're not ready for. When children have educational experiences that are not geared to their developmental level or in tune with their learning needs and cultures, it can cause them great harm, including feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, confusion. You see, children trust their parents. They sort of tend to lose that in teenage years, but they don't have to get a solid relationship with childhood. That was a tangent. Children trust their parents. When they're asked to do something that they're not ready for, who do they blame? Do they rationally think this through? Actually, mom doesn't understand how my brain develops. No, they blame themselves, right? Well, this person I trust is asking me to learn something that I can't seem to master, so something must. We actually cause emotional disturbance when we ask the child to do something that they're not ready for. And that becomes a vicious cycle as it begins to cause problems. Security, and then they're not learning as well, and that causes more problems with security, and so they don't learn as well, and becomes a situation. So socialize primarily with people in the first few years, develop a solid relationship with children, and spend time together. Time spent cuddling, gazing, and playing, establish a bond of security and trust, on which the entire child development pyramid is based. Now, let me briefly touch on socialization. How age integration is much better for socialization than age segregation, right? So children need to socialize within the family. What we can actually create by separating them from the family is negative socialization. You can develop social skills with your peer group. And we see this a lot today, right? We don't know how to relate with others. That's negative socialization. We want good socialization in an age mixture. What about learning skills? Some people think that, well, you need to go to school to develop memory. Fact of the matter is, just like as we look around the world, the people groups who spend the least amount of time in school have the best eyesight. By the same treatment, in the same, if you look at more research that shows that the more time that people spend, memories are. We actually are schooling the memories. How about that? The North Plains Aborigines, for example, find a song by them, but it takes 5 minutes. I can't remember all the words to a hymn out of it. Primitive people can observe a herd of several hundred animals and detect the absence of a single animal and know which one it is without counting. Many vocabularies are full of names for very detailed aspects of the world around them. I remember first reading this. Oh, that's crazy. Then I spent some time in Tanzania, Africa. I was sharing some of this material at school there, and the school was part of a larger mission. And someone came up to me afterward, who was also a volunteer from the United States. She said, I'm the director of the livestock program here at the mission. And she said, we hired native Maasai, maybe familiar with that term, a famous tribe in Africa, skilled in caring for animals. She said, we hired native Maasai to take care of our herd of cattle. She said, we bring our herd of cattle, 70 some cows, to eat water in the evening. And these men will take a glance over the herd and they'll tell their friend, hey, we're missing such and such a cow. They name the cow they're missing. And she said one day, she went and talked to him. She said, well, I'm the livestock director here. I kind of need to know these things. Can you guys please teach me how to know when to miss a cow? They're like, how do you not know when missing They never have the world, but you have the right path. Basic information. How? How is that possible? While the school person depends heavily on external signs, such as the written word or Google, to hold knowledge for him, the primitive native depends on every detail of the landscape is remembered what seems to be a photographic memory, even first time passing through. So most children have an identity. Parents, you may have this. It is rare to look to adult. No, it is not at all. It is nothing. With phenomenal memory, it is a lot of that. And again, if we just give some more time, well, what about reading skills? This is a big one. A lot of parents are concerned that the child learned to read on time. Absolutely valid concern. We want our children to be good readers. Reading is good. Important. The question is, what is on time? Should we ask that question? We kind of have this assumption as to what our time is. Reality shows something. And yeah, sums it up, doesn't it? In many schools, children are identified with reading before they would have even have started school in many other countries. Think about this. Now, let me share some science. It comes from the Early Childhood Research Quarterly, a very respected journal. The foundation of later reading and reading comprehension in language. Okay, we want to lay a good foundation for reading skills. Where do we start? Language, okay? Build good language skills. Talking together, right? Conversation. And this is actually what the research supports. The more children are just engaged in conversation with their parents, the better they are as readers. And the more easily they develop. So some steps you can take. Talk together. Really, that's a small conversation. Children don't usually have a problem with conversation, do they? Why? 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 Answer the questions. The key to the answer they're learning. You know, when children ask that question, you got an opportunity to teach something. And this can be about everyday life. And it can also be, well, what's that sign say? Mom, can you teach me how to write? Mom, what's the name of this book? That's the name. Mom, word. Sorry. Take advantage of it. Take a minute. Teach them something. Don't want to sit down and class on reading. You're taking minutes here and there throughout life, everyday life, and more often than not, children will teach themselves how to read. And I mean that from the science. Use books and reading as the source of gaining needed information about it, not this forced drill they have to go through. And I've lost count, literally, of hundreds, probably thousands of parents who have talked to me, told me the story of how their child taught themselves how to read. I heard one mom told me, she said her little boy was about 7, I think, 6 or 7. And he came to her and said, Mom, I want to read you a story. He had his book with him. She said, okay, yeah, go ahead and read me the story. She's expecting the book's going to be upside down and he's going to give her a made up story, right? No. So he sits down, he opens the book, it's right side up, and he reads the story on the page. She's like, he doesn't know how to read. Oh, you know what? He said that before. Yeah. So she turned to another part of the book he didn't know very well and said, read me that story. And he read it. And in her, she goes, I was a little upset because it was my job to teach him how to read. He didn't do it. But then she thought about it. She said, I guess I was teaching. Every day, like here and there. We didn't. You need to create a mindset of wanting to learn. If a child wants to learn, they'll discover these value orphanage. But if we try to fit them for a certain period of time every day, and it's so boring, now, oh, it's not necessary. Learning to read is actually quite easy. Research shows it only takes about 30 contact hours to read all of the proficient level. Let's look at one other study. They did a study comparing 2 groups of children. RIA stands for Reading Instruction Age. The early reading instruction age group had initially superior letter naming, non-word and passive reading, word and passive reading, but this difference in reading skills disappeared by age 11. And the later reading instruction age group had generally greater reading comprehension. Okay, so they compared 2 groups of students. They had a group that they started teaching how to read at age 5. They had another they started teaching them how to read at age 7. And they found, here's a chart, measuring their average reading and decoding fluency. Decoding and reading fluency. And this is an interesting, when we look at this chart, that what becomes very clear is children who start reading later have far better fluency. They don't read word by word and pause at, not that kind of reading. They see it and they just read it fluently. So fluency is a major aspect here. The blue represents the group starting at age 5. The orange represents the group starting at age 7. So look at age 5, okay, first group starting. Age 6, there's a people in this group, they haven't taught them anything yet, but they're teaching themselves a little bit of how to read. Then age 7, look what happens. Here comes the second group they're starting to teach them. Age 8, they're advancing, but if we pause here at age 8, about age 8, doing a lot of comparisons, right? This age. Is your child reading? How are they doing? Okay. Look at the comparison. What will we conclude if we looked at age 8? It must be better to start earlier because the later one's behind. Look at age 9. The one who started earlier didn't advance much. Thinking is routed through the incorrect thinking center, right? Those stop, exactly. Those who started later caught up. Look what happened at age 11. Passed them up. 2 years wasted time. And as the research shows, they're better, they're more fluent, they enjoy reading. The children who started at 5 developed less positive attitudes toward reading and showed poorer text comprehension than those children who started later. And interesting, they looked at Montessori schools because they're pretty well known for very early. And they said Montessori children had an advantage in reading over public school children at age 5, but not at age 12. Difference disappeared again. Our findings suggest that. Now, they did another study in a kindergarten classroom. Fascinating research here. It is true that some children that learn to read remark can learn to read remark. But the fact that it can does not necessarily mean that they should. Good point. Should is another question. One school district set up an experiment to help find this question. Some kindergartners in the district received extensive instruction in reading. Others spent the same amount of time learning science. They observed thermometers in places. They played with magnets, with plants, learned about animal life, and so on. Sounds pretty fun. Books and pictures were available for these children if you wanted them, but no lesson to read or help. What do you think the results were? Which group do you think did better in reading? By third grade, the science children were far ahead of the reading children in their science scores. In their reading scores. The reason, their vocabulary and thinking skills were more advanced. They could read on more topics and understand materials. The reading children, by starting earlier, used up a lot of time on the skills of reading, while the science children spent time learning stuff. And when they did begin reading, they were older and knew more and learned in a fraction of the time. See what we're doing. In life, they're learning for everyday life, answering the question, into the learning, stuff that comes up, you're building the foundation to the brain. A child, if they have a motivation for learning, will read well. And this motivation is key. I have a friend, and he was in his teens or something, was not reading very well. She had followed himself, he's not in, but he just doesn't want to read. And I said, well, what kind of hobby does he have? Well, he recently been starting a farm. And he had goats. And he needed to take care of those goats. So he bought this book, take care of the goats. And he took the book to his mom and said, can you read it for me? She said, no, you're old enough, you read it yourself. Guess what? Within a few weeks, he was a great reader. Sometimes there's a little thing for motivation, right? Oh, there's multiple factors. Talk together, read to the child, allow plenty of time for movement and activity, and utilize the question. Instead of learning. Couple of points, we have 12 points. We're nearing the end here. The effect on voice is a major factor here. Are we seeing a lot of problems with voice today? Really serious issues. In fact, and the connection here is because of that 2-year difference in brain development. All the effects we've just discussed are intensified in voice. We'll see more of the problems in voice growth. And boys today are not learning. They receive 70% of the D's and F's. Grading, I don't know what grade it is in Trinidad, but these are the lowest 2 grades on the score. Given to all students. Boys cause 90% of classroom business problems. 80% of all high school dropouts are boys. Millions of boys are enrolled in unvetted control drugs, and 3 out of 4 students labeled learning disabled boys. It's not created boys to just be a problem. Clearly not. What is the goal? Boys. Climate. We have leadership, right? No. Churches. I don't think they want that, do they? That's become pretty evident. What's going on in the world. And there are many factors involved. I recognize that. So that's the big one. Because for years, because of the fact they're start, boys believe them. Because they're being
True.
I've heard of them, you're treating boys like defective girls. We're comparing the boys to the girls. The girls are doing fine, the boys aren't. Well, we got one. Factor matter is just different. Right? The early curriculum is more accelerated. More boys are expected to reach college soon. They're very not ready for it. They begin their school careers in dumb groups. They're frustrated with their lack of ability. They start to fight school and they begin to avoid it more than ever now. Not to say boys can't do well in school. No, they can actually do really well. They just need a little more. Get started. Fine. ADHD. This is the big one. Actually, I've heard said that the most diagnosed disorder in childhood is ADHD. The correct diagnosis would be boyhood. Boys are just more active. That way, they need activity. But ADHD in both boys and girls found to be, well, let me just read that. We found that delaying kindergarten by 1 year. Notice 1 year. We're not talking about just a year difference. Reduced inattention and hyperactivity by 73%. Those in the research is this a significant percentage. Major. 72% reduction for child at age 11 and virtually eliminated the average child at that age higher than this is significant. We could really pretty much get rid of ADHD. Media and early school. I'll talk more about the media tomorrow. I'm not saying it's not a legitimate disorder. Certainly it is, but we can prevent it a lot of times by just giving the choice full time. Now, the question is, won't they be left behind? Good question. If we wait until later to start, won't they be behind? That's what the research shows. Children who start academic far ahead, they start the time. They will much less frustration. Yeah. Begin like much faster because we are ready to start it. And there's so much research that we look at on this. In a study of 300 individuals who started school at about age 8, later all quickly caught up with their classes, and in most cases performed well above the class average. There's substantial agreement among the full education research earlier, and most late starters, actually the late starters generally excel in behaviors, sociality, and leadership, important skills. All of the learning necessary for success in high school can be accomplished in 2 or 3 years of all skill set. Something we now that just we have to ready for it. They do very well very quickly. Let me give an example. So, this is just an example. I'm not saying this is what is taught in each grade, just illustrating a point. Don't get caught in the actual numbers. But okay, so first grade, we're going to start with simple math. Addition of 1, 3 plus 5. Now the brain isn't quite ready for it. So, and we're not doing it in real life, so we have to do repetition, 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 right? Lots of exercise. So, you know, we get it into the brain, and they find. Anyone have the answer, children? 3 plus 5? 8. All right, thank you. Great. Now, second grade, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to take the same concept. This is called the spiral approach curriculum. We're going to take the same step, make it a little more difficult. Oh, do something like illustrated spiral approach. Every year, it makes it more difficult. So, again, brains maybe not quite. So we have to do lots of repetition. Repeat, and finally get it. Anyone have the answer? 30. Okay, very good. So, third grade rolls around. What are we going to do? Well, summer slide. Teachers know what I'm talking about. They've forgotten everything they learned from the previous year. So we have to repeat the previous 2 years, catch them up with speed, and now again, a lot of repetition, and we finally drill it there. What have the answer? Ooh, we're getting tired, aren't we? Okay, I heard it. Maybe not. Right. So third grade, fourth grade rolls around. Same thing. Review the previous years because they forgot. Really understood it. Moving to fourth grade. Difficult. Lot more repetition. That one for a second. The calculator says the accountant. All right, we have it. 25 minutes to do. Now, the point here was not necessarily math, but this is how we're doing, right? Year by year, we learn the same things. There has to be a lot of repetition because we're kind of always at the formulas. Take a different concept. Let's suppose that we didn't buckle down the textbooks in first or second grade, or maybe till fourth grade. What age is that? 9 or 10, right? Depending, somewhere around there. And so we said, you know what? Oh, but meanwhile, we were learning all this stuff. You learn addition, what, in the kitchen, in the garden, yeah, easy, right? Learn lots of stuff. So you wait until the child's around 8 or 10, something like that. Hey, let's learn this stuff. Okay, fine. That's 8. Okay, here's how you write it. Put it down like this. Put a little line on your 8. Okay, I can do that. And what's 14 plus 16? That's 30. Okay, let me show you how to do that. And let me show you how to do it. And let me show you how to do it. In a half an hour, you can teach this to a 10-year-old, right? If they already understand the content. So when we say catching up, we're not saying we wait to 8 or 10 and then repeat, you know, and cram in because 4 or 5 years of schooling for 14 hours. What we do, the brain already understands the concepts. We're just taking them, putting them on paper. Because they're able to learn, they're interested. They'll catch right up. And research shows very quickly, within a month or two, they can be right at the grade. In fact, I was in Tanzania, sharing some of this material, finished up the seminar. I said, hey, principal of a school, right? Head teacher, we call it head teacher. We take the principal, okay. You take the principal blend like. Can't know what term I'm supposed to use. Right, but in terms of tradition, head teacher. Anyway, so the principal raised his hand and he said, well, I didn't really have a question. Experience. He said, I was a first boy. I was 13. And I could get my father taking care of my family's cattle. I this let me go to school. You know, by the way, sorry, throwing a spear at hippos, going after lions. I mean, it was an inside child. So, and so he said, yeah, I convinced my father to let me go to school. So he said, I went to school and I learned to read in 2 days. Wow. Okay. That was okay. Well, I understood the B and the T. Okay, or for you. So he said, within about a week, I was taught. And he said a couple of months later, it was time to do the national debate. And he said, if I remember right, he said his teacher didn't really want him to at first. He only got to school for a couple of months. He was like, it's still been easy. Let me give it a try. So he did the national exam, scored top of the school. I thought to myself, wow, this is the genius. He's pretty bright. I said, well, thank you. That really does anyone have a question? One of the teachers raised his hand. Well, I didn't really have a question. Just wanted to share my story. I actually heard one also. So, 12, I convinced my father to let me go to school, and I learned to read about a week. I was part of the other guy, I guess. And a couple of weeks later, caught up with my class level, took the national exams in a couple of months, and scored near the top. Things here today. I wasn't quite thinking. That's really cool. Pretty fascinating stories. Now, that didn't happen. Another teacher in hand. Well, I didn't really have a experience. I was a very boy, and you know the story. And another one, it was actually very little. Especially for a firstborn in the family. Wait for some younger children to grow up and take care of the cows. And then they go off to school, and they did very, very well. Inadvertently, they were following God's design. I'm not suggesting, you know, have our children be herds, herd children, how to say that, until they're, you know, don't steer the devote, right? Until they're 12, and keep them away from both stuff. But it was that they were following a plan of life that really strengthened the mind. And so when the time came for them to apply it to the academic learning, and I think that's called around a couple more minutes, almost right. We get that. Okay. I have some friends who were from Brazil. We know about the system there in Brazil, very difficult. A lot of restrictions. Well, my friends were living in the US for a while. Very few restrictions. And they were enjoying just the freedom to learn, reading. They were not very structured about their education. Not to say the children weren't learning, just really engaged in lots of, we would say, extracurricular activities, learning from everyday life. And they really hadn't done any formal curriculum for a few years. Because actually the last grade that we completed was grade 2 for 12. She said that's not to say we weren't running textbooks here and there, but in terms of completing a full grade, it had been a few years. So people would ask for 12-year-old son, what grade he was in, like 2, I get it. Grades are so arbitrary. They really don't measure a whole. You can just say that they're to that age. Anyway, so the time came, they needed to return to Brazil. And they said, Mom said, well, you know, this could be a problem because we don't have a lot of documentation. Not that I'm having learning, we just don't have a lot down. She said, she felt a little bit like a failure. She said, well, I guess probably the best thing to apply for a national exam that will grade you, give us the grade level we have in subjects. You can take that back and say, okay, this is back to Brazil. So she applied for that exam. She got it, and it was something done on the computer. And there were several subjects. I forget how many exactly, quite a few. And she told her son, do them one at a time, take a break, go outside, between, keep your brain fresh. Well, he was just so excited to do that. He sat down and knocked all. Took him almost all day. He goes, oh, you know, he's tired, he's not. Whatever. And so results then off. She gets them back in a couple of weeks. She started looking through. She's expecting to fail. But remember, it's grading him. The last year, full year grade he's done was grade 2. The lowest grade she could find was grade 8. On one of the subjects, it was grade 8. Okay, grade 9. English is their second language, grade 10. Then there were some subjects, there were a few at grade 11, grade 12, which was the highest. And then a couple of subjects that said PHF. She said, those are the ones he failed. If you look back at the legend about what PHF meant, post high school. Her son goes, what's that mean, Mom? I guess it means you're done with school. Now, it's interesting how from reading books in English and from going to conferences, field trips, things like that, right? There was one of the vocabulary books. She noticed that he got right. She had no idea what the word was. And she asked him, how did you know what that was? I never taught you. Yeah, 2 years ago, we were at this conference and the presenter was using it referring to such and such. Incredible memory, right? We're living that lifestyle, that strengthening the minds. Great. You know, he was in well with that. I'm not saying, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that every child is going to be this academic genius just for following methods. And I'm proud of that, actually, because our ultimate goal is character development. And that's where we're coming from. Final point, that is spirituality. Love it. We talked about that more. If we fail in developing strong spiritual strength in our children, a good character, we really miss the point of true education. The early years are an important period of developing spirituality, cause effect reasoning, emotion, relationships, behavior management, language, memory, and character. Why is it important list, right? Every one of these things, the foundation is laid in the first 7 years of child life. Right? And I have to imagine Satan must have a little thought process. I don't want parents focusing on character development for the years. Let me get them distracted. Yes. And so he's managed massively this idea. Parents want that they have to pressure the academics early to prepare them for life. The reality is the opposite. They'll actually learn the better if we wait. Meanwhile, we pass up a vital window of time for developing character. The early years are a critical period for the areas of the brain that lay the foundation of spiritual. I love this thing. Parents, especially mothers, should be the only teachers of such infant mind. Now, this requires a little context. Just earlier, it says infancy extends through the age of 6 or 7. Written a while ago, we wouldn't use it for that age nowadays. This was the context. And it says parents should be the only teachers at this age, up until the age of 6 or 7. They should not educate for books. Pretty fascinating. But don't use books, Mom. Go outside. The children generally inquisitive to learn the things of nature. Now, children ask questions about the things that are around them, right? So if you want them to ask questions about nature, where do you need to put them? Outside of nature. They will ask questions in regard to the things they see and hear. And parents should have the opportunity to instruct. And in this matter, get advantage by the minds of the children by sowing good seed in their hearts, leaving no room for bad things. The mother's loving instructions at tender age is what is needed by children. And I think about Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1, because to everything is a season and a time to every purpose. God have a schedule? No. He's still out. Jesus talked about it in the parable in Mark chapter 4. First the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn of the ear. You grow corn, right? So imagine you go out and you plant corn. A week later, you come out, 10 days later, whatever, come out, and you see the little corn plants coming up. What do you do? Yeah, I have the corn, right? Oh, yeah. Look at it and be like, I want a corn. I want a corn. What's the problem here? No. You say, I've got corn. Somebody could be looking at you and go, what do you mean you have corn? You have plants. Then you have the promise, right? Is that little corn plant beautiful? Oh, it's pretty, isn't it? But imagine you're like, okay, I get it. Promise the corn, but I need corn now. So you reach down there and you grab that plant and start, come on, grow faster. And you can't do it. You kill it. Oh man, I didn't know that. Replant it. That plant will never be stopped. Work with this. Not try to hurry it. We started with this, finished with this. Parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. Doesn't this line up with the science? Perfect, right? As fast as the mind can comprehend, we should open house reading. That's a book that doesn't require the two-dimensional vision. That's a book outside. The only schoolroom for children until 8 or 10 years of age should be open air, flowers, and nature's beauties. Nature. We've looked at this in the past. Maybe some of us have read this. Well, that's no. Now we realize this is absolutely right. Now, the more clear we see it, the more correct it is. So it's better late than early, to put it with thing. We need to focus on what is most important during the early years. We need to focus on character. And I want to close with this saying that it's easy when we talk about this to focus on what we're not to do. Yeah, don't do the academic, don't teach the reading now, don't do that. That's not actually the point. The point is, you have a window of time to focus on character development. Thank you. For it. Focus on that. Develop character. Your relationship, your time outside, through learning from nature, practical work, everyday life, all of these things, right? I'm not saying you can't learn from academics here and there throughout everyday life. That's great. But it's not focused. You focus on the character. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to jot them down. We'll do a Q&A later. Maybe I can mention one thing because I know it comes up a lot. Parents say, well, what if I didn't know this before? And I started the academic life too early. What can I do? That's a big question to answer. Let me just say it this way. God's plans always work. There's an plan A, there's plan B. The difference is plan B is just a little more difficult. So you can absolutely start now. Even if you haven't understood these things before. Do what you should start now. Do it now. Invest in relationship. It will open the heart to receive God's word. Invest in the study of the Bible. Invest in developing care. Invest in practical work. Physical activity. These things heal the brain from the damage that we've seen. And you can also take a school detox. This actually helps. Research shows clearly it can help reset areas of the brain that have the incorrect thinking patterns. Take a break. 6 months or a year, I can share so many stories of success on this. Take a break. When you come back to it, the brain has had a reset and it. So again, any other questions, feel free to talk to me or jot them down. We'll do them in the Q&A. Let's have a word of prayer to close. Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for all this research information. We have a clear picture of how we should properly educate our children. Pray for the parents, for the teachers here. You'll give them wisdom and help them know how they can cooperate with you in developing a character for heaven, teaching their children. Thank you for the day that we've had, the things that we've learned. We ask your blessing and for safety as we travel back to our homes. Reuniting again tomorrow to